he says, the lost enjoy forever the horrible freedom they demanded and are therefore self-enslaved.
Yikes. This is Ask Dr. E, where Dr. Michael Easley answers your biblical or theological questions in 10 minutes or less. Today's question comes from Buzz. Can I say Buzz's name? Everyone's going to know who he is if they know Buzz. There's only like one Buzz in the world.
I saw Buzz not real long ago, and he said, are you going to answer my question?
Okay,
I said,
well,
yes,
here,
sir.
Buzz, it's for you. We're answering your question. We're using your name. All right, this is Buzz's question. He says, my question concerns Romans 1, verses 24 to 28, which I assume you will read to us,
Sure.
Dad, where Paul is talking about the unrighteous and how God gave them up, first in the lusts of their heart, then to dishonorable passions, and finally to a debased mind. What does it mean when God does this? Is it a progressive removal of divine restraints and consequences that push people closer and closer to rock bottom? Does it ever get to the point that God abandons the unrighteous and they can never be saved? Or is there still hope for them through the gospel? If there is still hope for them, why does Paul seem to put them in a special category of being given up? Wouldn't they be in the same state as everyone else before conversion? In other words, biased to choosing sin over holiness until God changes their heart. All right, I feel like this is a 45-minute sermon, so I look forward to your answer in probably about 9 minutes at this point.
That's a good prayer. That's a good prayer. It's a real perceptive question.
Yeah.
And just a couple observations. I do want to read the passage, but the observation of, and you read it, progressive removal of divine restraints and consequences, and then he talks abandoning them to rock bottom. So that's sort of distilling a lot of what he's asking. And there's a progression in the passage that he's picked up on. So let's read the passage for folks that may not know what we're talking about. Romans 1, 21 to 24. For even though they knew God, and that's the introductory, not to get into syntax, but that's the introductory phrase that's going to govern this section. Mm-hmm. They knew God. Mm-hmm. They did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. So we see a progression. They know God, and they turn away from him. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and birds, and four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. And here's the hinge. Verse 21, even though they knew God. Now, verse 24, therefore God gave them over. So we have to keep that thought in mind with this section. They knew God, but because they exchanged the glory of incorruptible for corruptible, that's when God gave them over, and the lust of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. So it's really important to keep this. And corruptible exchange. They knew God, but they switched. So verse 24, 26, and 28 all use this phrase, God gave them over. It's the Greek word paradidomi. And translations fuss with it. One of the best renderings was to hand over or delivered over. Now, to be careful with language and not get too technical, but it's not causal. It's not like he made this happen to them. They made the choice. They made the switch. As a result, God says, go your way. You want to go that path? Go your way. So 3 times. In league with that, in verses 23, 25, and 26, he says, exchanged. So God gave them over, but the word exchanged 3 times. Exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God. Exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. So he's giving them over because they exchanged something.
Counterfeit. They chose a counterfeit.
So these are people willfully choosing something they know is wrong.
Yep.
And that's where the giving over. So we're not implicating God. See, God's going to throw them to hell.
Yep.
They made this path. Now, a couple of observations on the passage. God's wrath and the righteousness of God is the primary thesis of Romans. It's this loving, glorious God versus the wrath of God, 2 sides of the same coin. Verses 19 to 23, it's mankind's rebellion. This is what man's doing in this exchange. In verses 24 to 7, it's God's judgment because of that. So we sin, and there is going to be a judgment. 28 to 31 lists these horrible sins, gross sins, and then verse 32 is the summary verse. Make no mistake, they've made a choice, and their end is unrighteousness, and worse than that, they give approval to other people who do the same. So that's the whole outline of the passage.
Okay.
So the exchanging truth for a lie, incorruptible, corruptible, this is the consequence of it. Now, Buzz says, wouldn't they be in the same state as everyone before conversion? They knew of God and willfully chose ungodliness. And so, yes, the unrighteous, all of us are in that boat. We all need to be saved. But because they suppressed the truth, it seems to me back they knew God, but they chose not to honor him. So this is an interesting category of people that heard the gospel, we'd say, learned all about it. I don't buy it. I reject it. I'm going to choose sin, self, hubris, pride. I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to give accolades to those who do it with me. So the idea of unrighteousness, righteousness, incorruptible, corruptible, God's wrath, God's judgment, all these factor into the book of Romans. So if they remain in an unrighteous state, they're going to hell.
Right.
They're going to hell. For any person who hears the gospel and rejects Christ, it's not one and done. It's not the only time they get a chance. Right. But if they persist in unrighteousness, yeah, that's what you believe, I don't buy it, they're in an unrighteous, unredeemed state. And until they come to the knowledge that these folks had but rejected and say, I was wrong. You have to be careful with, is repentance part of the salvation path? Because we're not saying you got to be good enough to get to God.
Right.
But repentance simply meaning a change of direction. I don't believe, I disbelieve, I disregard. I believe. I trust. I understand what he did. Consequently, I know I'm a sinner.
Yep.
And it kind of folds together. We can't be too,
Parse
step
it
1,
all
2,
out.
3. Yeah, because I think it works differently for even in the New Testament. I came across this quote in the little booklet, The Problem of Pain by Lewis. And it's a chilling quote, but it applies to this. He says, the lost enjoy forever the horrible freedom they demanded and are therefore self-enslaved.
Yikes.
The lost enjoy forever the horrible freedom they demanded and therefore are self-enslaved. And that really is Romans chapter 1.
Wow.
I exchanged the truth of God for a lie. I worship the creature rather than the creator. Unrighteousness is my path. I'm going to egg on those to do the same. And you'll get your horrible freedom if you don't come to Christ.
Wow. Okay, you did a great job. Way less than 45 minutes.
You didn't think I could do it, did you?
I didn't know. I'm like, this is going to be a long episode. I didn't ask too many follow-up questions, so maybe that helped us. But all right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, blame it on me. If you've got a question for Dr. E, call us, text us, email us. The info is in your show notes. Ask Dr. E is produced by me, Hannah Seymour, mixed and mastered by Sonomorphic, and music composed by Jason Gilman.